True marriages are said to be made in heaven. Sounds beautiful, right? But then there's this other saying that crosses my mind. A good thing is never called a marriage. Everyone has their own take on this, shaped by their personal views and experiences. For a long time, I was on that heavenly side of things, but these days, my perspective has shifted. Let's start from the beginning. After finishing my studies at the construction college, I ended up working with a team of high-voltage electricians. It was an exciting job with great pay, but the constant travel and relentless pace of life were exhausting. One day, during one of these trips, I met Scarlett. She was 22, tall with long dark hair, a deep skin tone, and an exotic look that immediately caught my attention. Wow, I thought when we first met. Then came the first conversation, the first invitation for a walk, and things just took off from there. During the month I spent in that nearby city, Scarlett and I became pretty close. Evening walks, cafe dates, long talks about life, and watching the sunrise together. Just your typical love story, I guess. By the time I turned 27, I'd pretty much given up on the idea of a random encounter turning into something special. But when my business trip ended, I headed back to my hometown. Still, I kept in touch with Scarlett, of course. Long-distance relationships aren't exactly something to daydream about. So I made the decision to move closer. Work wasn't an issue. I transferred to a new location, and the company even helped me find a place. A couple of months later, life was pretty great. I lived just 2 minutes away from my girl. I wasted no time proposing that we move in together. But instead of a yes, Scarlett hit me with the bombshell. Honey, I'll only live with you after we get married. My dad won't let me. Honestly, that kind of statement can knock the wind right out of you. So, the meeting with her parents was scheduled. It was clear from Scarlett's appearance that her family were not pure-blooded Europeans, but I still had no idea what to expect. When I arrived at her parents' house, I was greeted by her father, a huge man, so massive that I thought I could easily hide behind his back and still not be seen. Despite his intimidating size, Uncle Julian, as he introduced himself, turned out to be a warm, cheerful guy. However, when the topic of living together came up, he ended the conversation with just one line. Athan, if you want to live with my Scarlett, see the matchmakers. After the wedding, you can live together. Discouraged? No, not exactly. More like completely stunned. But at the same time, I knew without a doubt that I wanted to spend my life with his daughter. A week later, the matchmakers came, and a month after that, we were married. It was the start of a beautiful life together. I've heard plenty of times that daily life can eat away at passion, that the routine of marriage can choke the love out of a family. But even when our firstborn, Wheat, came into the world, the peace and happiness at home didn't waver. At work, my colleagues would occasionally comment, a hint of envy in their voices. It can't be that perfect. You must be hiding something. But the secret to our family's happiness was really quite simple. At our wedding, Uncle Julian gave a speech. He stood up and said, "If either of you hurts the other, I'll break your nose." Naturally, it was a joke, but somehow it worked. We never had serious conflicts. It felt like arguments just never found their way to us. Even the little Cupid-like forces seemed to be working to protect our happiness. But that's just the romantic version. Work changed over the years, but business trips were still part of the deal, just not as often. During these trips, I missed my family terribly. I'd call every chance. I called just to hear my beloved's voice. Every time I came back, my team would greet me like a guest of honor. Over time, I became more and more convinced that I had made the right choice. Then one day, during a business trip, Scarlett called me. "Athan, we have a problem here." "What happened?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "They're going to put me in the hospital. Pneumonia." Immediately, my mood dropped. So many thoughts ran through my head. How is Scarlett? What about our son? What's happening at home? My in-laws took care of our son until I could get back. I took the earliest leave I could and rushed home. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. I wanted it to be a surprise. As soon as I arrived, I went straight to the hospital. Imagine my surprise when I found out that Scarlett had checked out the day before. Okay, she must be home, I thought. But when I got there, the apartment was empty. There wasn't a single thing out of place. No sign that anyone had been there. Without hesitation, I headed to my in-laws' place. My father-in-law greeted me at the door. Hey, Uncle Julian, I've got a surprise for Scarlett. Where is she? He frowned a bit. Athan, I get it, but she's still in the hospital. She checked out yesterday and she's not at home, I replied, confused. What do you mean she's not here either? For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other like a couple of idiots. Eventually, my father-in-law snapped out of it first. He pulled out his phone, dialed his daughter's number, and put it on speaker. Yes, Daddy, Scarlett answered. How are you, daughter? How are you feeling? What are you up to? I'm fine, Daddy, just going through some procedures. I'll call you back later. It was as if the whole situation followed some kind of script. We headed to the hospital, asked around, reached out to friends, and eventually ended up at another address. When we arrived, music and laughter greeted us from the apartment. The door opened, and without a word, my father-in-law stepped inside with me right behind him. Inside, there were about a dozen people, half of them guys. Uncle Julian did a thorough inspection of the apartment, and I just stood there, stunned, my mind racing. Suddenly, a crash and screams came from the bedroom. My father-in-law and I rushed toward the noise. In the corner of the room, there were two half-naked figures, my whiff and some guy. Without hesitation, Uncle Julian marched over and pummeled them into the corner, landing heavy blows, yelling, cursing, and beating for what felt like 15 long minutes. I tried desperately to stop my furious father-in-law, but he was unstoppable. When it was over, Scarlett turned to me and said the only thing she could, Athan, I'm sorry. I love you. I don't even know how this happened. Will you forgive me? Uncle Julian, still silent, took her hand gently, like a kitten, and led her out of the room. I wordlessly walked out. Back at her parents' house, I found out they hadn't returned yet. Panic started to rise in me, but my son, who hadn't seen me in a while, kept me distracted with his games. A couple of hours later, my father-in-law and Scarlett finally came back. They were packing her things. I'm sorry, Athan, Uncle Julian said, his eyes downcast. You've been like a son to me, and after what happened, I can't even look you in the eye. I really messed up. I'm sorry. We got divorced a month later. My father-in-law insisted that I keep everything, the house and our son. As for Scarlett, she was sent to work far away from home, discreetly but with the clear understanding that she should never return. I still keep in touch with my former in-laws, but my whiff rarely crosses our mind. Cheating Secrets podcasts like me